I remembered the story of clever Hans. And that's a story I want to tell you today in 10 acts. Hi, this is Vojko Michnia. Welcome to the vlog. Did you know that only a few months ago I was in Inner Mongolia riding horses and camels and sliding on the dunes? Well, I just remembered that today, and then my thoughts kind of got carried away, and I remembered the story of Clever Hans. Clever Hans was a horse owned by this German dude called Wilhelm von Osten, who was able to allegedly add, subtract, multiply, divide, work with fractions, tell the time, keep track of the calendar, differentiate between musical tones, and he was even able to read, spell, and understand basic German. Now that's a huge story, and that's a story I want to tell you today in 10 acts. So let's switch cameras and begin. Act 1. Background of the times. In the early 20th century, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, first formulated in his 1859 seminal book on the origin of species, got the public interested in animal intelligence. The idea was that if humans evolved from animals, then animals are at least partially intelligent. Act 2. Who was Wilhelm von Osten? Wilhelm von Osten was born late 1800s, and he was a German high school mathematics teacher. He lived in Berlin, and he had many interests, one of which was phrenology. Phrenology was a pseudoscience who claimed that one's intelligence, character, personality, traits can be decided based on the shape of one's head. By studying the bumps on your skull, you could tell someone if they're good at music, or if they're good at art or at literature. That was crazy. The theory was discredited, and our friend Wilhelm von Osten moved on to other interests. Animal intelligence. Act 3. Hans the horse. Clever Hans. Van Osten believed that animals actually can have reasoning skills and display intelligence. Now, to test this hypothesis, he decided to train animals into the arts of mathematics. After all, he was a mathematics teacher. So he decided to teach a cat, a bear, and a horse different mathematical equations and additions and subtractions. Now, as you can imagine, the cat couldn't care less. The bear was somewhat dangerous. After all, it was a wild animal. But the horse he had, Hans, an Arab stallion, proved to be quite a student. Hans learned to use his hoof to tap out numbers von Osten wrote on the blackboard. Imagine that. If Van Osten wrote on the whiteboard number 4, the horse went tap, 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 tap 4 times, basically displaying some sort of mathematical reasoning, understanding that 4 corresponds to 4 taps. Now, the horse, Hans, could do this for any number under 10. Now that's something. Happy with the success of his teaching, von Osten moved on to more complex problems and taught the horse arithmetics. He was able to train the horse to understand the symbols' meaning, a plus, a minus, multiplication, division. The horse was so good at math, or Van Osten was such a good math teacher that he was able to provide correct answers to a variety of math problems, including square roots and fractions. Act 4. Showing off. So starting 1891, Van Osten began to show hands, which became clever hands, all over Germany, and people were impressed with the horse's mathematical proficiency. So Van Osten traveled around the country and put on free shows to larger and larger and larger crowds who were just dumbstruck by the horse's abilities. So imagine this, Hans, the horse, even learned how to respond to verbal questions, not only symbols on a whiteboard. So for example, Van Osten, the owner, asked the horse, what is the square root of 16? And obviously it's 4. 4 times 4 is 16. So the horse tapped again 4 times. Tap, 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 tap. And that was the correct answer. Apart from doing square roots, Hans was also able to spell. That's again crazy. He was able to spell using taps of his hooves. So A was a tap, B was 2 taps, C was 3 taps, so on and so forth. So basically the horse was able to spell short names. That's just mad. Now, he was even able to respond to basic questions such as, what's the time of the day? That's mad. That's just mad. Now, how accurate was Hans, clever Hans? He was pretty accurate. According to later research, he was roughly 89% correct all the time. Basically, he had the knowledge of a 14-year-old child. And he was a horse. Act 5. The Hans Commission. Obviously, not many people believed what they were seeing. They were skeptical. Now, in 1904, Von Osten became kind of like internationally popular when the New York Times published a 2-page story about the horse and the owner. This is the article. It makes a fascinating read. I'm going to put a link to the article below. Go and check it out and read it for yourself. It's just fascinating. But this brought the attention to Hans, and the scientific community kind of wondered like, hey, is he like a scam artist? Is he for real? So Germany's Board of Education was asked to conduct an investigation, an independent investigation into Hans's abilities. And guess what? Von Osten agreed. Why do you think he agreed? Because he himself believed that he managed to actually teach the horse a language and mathematics and give him basic knowledge, everyday knowledge. So the board was formed and they assembled into a commission which later on became known as the Hans Commission. Now, the Hans Commission included scientists from a wide variety of fields. We had 2 zoologists, a psychologist, a horse trainer, school teachers, and even a circus manager. Like pretty much this was like a circus, right? So after quite extensive independent testings, the commission concluded the same year the article was published in 1904 that there's no trick. Like, the horse's responses were genuine. Hans had all these skills. He had all these abilities to answer the questions that a 14-year-old child might be able to answer. Act 6. Here comes Oskar Pfungst. Now, the Hans Commission was really dumbstruck by their own findings. So they passed on the investigation to another psychologist by the name of Oskar Pfungst. Now, this psychologist in 1907 decided that it's time to get to the bottom of this. How can the horse do all these things? So he set up an experiment, actually several experiments, which gave us amazing results, and the conclusions are even, impacting today's view of psychology and research and how research is conducted. So what did he do? He erected a tent, and inside the tent he conducted his experiments. Why did he do it in the tent? Because he wanted to take all the visual stimuli, the outside visual stimuli that the horse was exposed to during all these shows, to make sure that there was no clues, no triggers from the audience. Maybe von Osten had like a sidekick who was giving the horse clues. So to get enough data, he had to come up with a large list of questions, and all these questions had to take into consideration different variables. So here are the 4 variables that Oskar Pfungst put to the test. First variable was the questioner himself. So Hans was very good at answering questions in the tent in front of Oskar Pfungst when the owner von Osten asked the question. So the real scientist Pfungst said, okay, let me get someone else to come and ask the questions. Can the horse answer the questions correctly? Well, guess what? With other questioners and under normal conditions, as in inside the tent and whatnot, the horse was able to answer correctly. So his first test with the questioner as a variable proved the commission right. The horse can answer questions. Now, let's move on to the second variable. And this is where things start getting tricky. He used distance as the variable. So during the shows, von Osten was pretty close to the horse. Now, in the series of tests, Oskar Pfungst asked the questioner, the owner, von Osten, to be further away and ask the question from a certain distance. Now, in this case, the horse's accuracy started diminishing. The further away the questioner was, the poorer the horse's accuracy got. So here we spot some glitches in the matrix, and Pfungst did not really understand at first exactly why, but it got him thinking. In experiments testing a third variable, what the questioner actually knows, the questioner did not know the answers to the question he asked the horse. Now, in this case, when von Osten asked the horse a question and von Osten himself did not know the answer, the horse's accuracy just nosedived. It was close to 0. So some huge question marks were starting to pop up in this study. The fourth variable was the questioner's presence. So this is what happened. When von Osten asked his question, he was not in front of the horse. He was concealed from the horse. And guess what? That without seeing his master, the questioner, without seeing a questioner, the horse did not know the answers at all. So by now, Pfungst was pretty sure that this horse did not actually know math, but he was in some way interacting with the presence of the questioner and getting the answers right. So Pfungst shifted the focus of his experiments and started looking at the interaction of the human and the horse, of the questioner and Hans. And what he noticed is just mind-boggling. The horse was actually influenced by the questioner's breathing, posture, and facial expressions. Every time the horse was close to getting the right answer, the questioner's features and facial expression and breathing involuntarily tensed up. So when the horse got the right answer, the questioner relaxed immediately, and that was a cue for the horse to stop tapping, and thus the horse gave us the impression that he had the right answer. So as soon as the tension disappeared from the person's face, the horse stopped tapping, taking this as a cue it's time to stop tapping. What is even more fascinating was the fact that Pfungst realized that the questioner does not even know that he creates this tension and that this tension gives the horse cues to the correct answers. Now, when the questioner did not know the answer to the question, the tension was not there. So Hans had no cues to follow, and there was basically no feedback from the questioner's facial features and posture. Now that is fascinating. Act 7. Pfungst conclusions. What does this all mean? It means that the experiment strongly indicated that the horse most likely had no clue of maths, had no grasp of spelling, but that did not make his owner, von Osten, a liar, because the owner himself did not know he was giving out these clues. The insight that we take from this is that Hans was not using his intellect to solve these problems, but he was being very receptive to subtle and unconscious cues given to him by the humans who knew the answers to his questions. Now, this takes our minds back to Darwin and the theory of evolution, and the horses did possess an enhanced sensitivity, which was most likely part of their social interaction with the other horses. And all this makes total sense from an evolutionary point of view, as in order to survive, detecting small postural changes was an important survival instinct and skill for horses in the wild. After all these questions were answered, Pfungst continued with his studies, and he discovered that the questioners seemed unable to stop, to suppress the giving of these subtle cues to the horse, and most of the time they were not even aware that they were giving out these cues to the horse. Act 8. The clever Hans effect. In later years, research has actually proven that many animals are sensitive to the cues that they receive from the human masters. And because of Hans and because of clever Hans, the term clever Hans effect describes the questioner's subtle influence and unintentional cues given to the subject in both humans and animals. Now, for this reason, psychologists and researchers have come up with modern research techniques which make sure that the researchers do not give the subject unintentional cues. So that's why today we have the double-blind method of research, in which the subject and the researchers have no clue about the details of the experiment until after the results are recorded. And how is this put into practice? Let's just take a very down-to-earth example. We have dogs that can sniff out drugs. Now, if the trainer of the dog takes the dog on the training ground where he has hidden some drugs, the dog can use the trainer's unintentional cues to find the place where the drugs are. So in these cases, the trainer does not know where the drugs were hidden, and the trainer just takes the dog around and, trains him to sniff out the drugs. Because the dog could use the trainer's body language and other cues which might just give him the answer to where the location of the drugs is. Act 9. Wilhelm von Osten didn't agree. Now, once the results of Oskar Pfungst's investigations were seen by the scientific community, everyone agreed that clever Hans actually is not that clever, but he has some skills, but these skills are not mathematics and language. But Wilhelm von Osten did not accept these explanations, and you know what? He continued with his shows around Germany, showing off his horses, math and body language skills. And guess what? The show was still popular. Act 10. What happened to clever Hans? In 1909, von Osten passed away and Hans was bought by other, horse trainers. And after that, we don't know much about what happened to Hans. It seems that he was used in the First World War in some sort of capacity in the military, but after 1916 there's no record of him and we don't know what happened to him. His fate remains mysterious. But the story of clever Hans, a horse that allegedly was able to perform arithmetic and other intellectual tasks, still remains fascinating. The story of clever Hans is a great story that I usually like to tell my students in my psychology class at the beginning of the academic year. Why is that? It gets them thinking about animal research, about what psychology is, and about, the scientific method. It gets them, thinking. And that's a great start. So I hope this story got you thinking, and if you enjoyed, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Alright, until tomorrow, this is Vojko Michnia. Ciao.